In today's video, I wanted to go through and discuss the story of the Mages Guild featured in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion Remastered. This explanation will summarize each quest that's featured in the storyline. It's meant to be a synopsis of each mission and will feature the Mages Guild lore, NPCs, and politics. What this video won't do is touch on my personal experiences or NPC dialogue. I already have a video like that up on this channel if that's something you'd also like to check out. As per usual, the facts and information provided are brought to you by the game itself and the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages. Without further ado, let's get into the story of Oblivion's Mages Guild. Like most other factions in Oblivion, gaining entry to the Mages Guild is pretty simple. In previous installments like Morrowind, the player had to show some sort of competency in the arcane arts, specializing in schools of magic, as well as ensuring willpower and intelligence are kept up to speed. However, in Oblivion, any warrior, rogue, marksman, or bard can enlist in the faction. Similar to the Fighters Guild, the Mages Guild has a hall in every major city. This also includes the capital, the Imperial City. Although, the Arcane University serves a very special purpose within the story, and it's a site that the player gets granted access to a little further down the line. In order to join the faction, the player must travel to one of the 7 major cities, excluding the capital and Kvatch. From there, they simply enter the guild hall and interact with the establishment's leader. Joining the guild will come up as a dialogue prompt, and in the press of a button, you officially become an associate. This gives you access to all areas of the guild halls, minus the university. You can sleep in the beds and receive a disposition increase with fellow guildmates. It also allows you to pick up and take most items found around the guild sites. As pointed out by the UESP, this can be a godsend for budding alchemists, as there is a plethora of ingredients around each hall. However, there's so much more to strive for than free ingredients and a place to rest your head. There's a fantastic story filled with triumph, power, and betrayal. The player has the ability to really elevate their potential. In order to progress through the story and ultimately gain entry to the Arcane University, the player needs to receive a recommendation from all 7 guild halls. How that's achieved is by entering each city's hall, speaking with their leader, and asking what needs to be done. This then brings on side quests within the Join the Mages Guild quest. They can be done in any order and have no prerequisites other than being a part of the guild. Starting with Bruma, the player can approach Jean Frisoric and ask for a recommendation. This task is widely considered the easiest of the 7 recommendations. Her job is simple. She just wants you to find a fellow guildmate, Jaskar. He's disappeared and she doesn't have the time to look for him. Asking around the guild hall, you'll eventually come to a high elf named Valinaro. Pressing him a bit, he says he can help you locate the Khajiit, but it'll come at a price. He wants you to go into Jean's office, break into her desk, and steal her manual of spellcraft. Through some more dialogue on Valinaro's part, and even Jean's, you learn that most of the guildmates at the Bruma Hall don't actually like her. It's revealed that she's not a very good mage and only got her position by buttering up the right people. So, several members of the Bruma Hall take it upon themselves to prank her and test her magical abilities. Hence the removal of the manual of spellcraft, her instruction book on casting spells. Once the book is in the player's possession, Valinaro will meet you in the living quarters at 10 PM. The Altmer will then cast a dispel spell, and it's revealed that Jaskar has been here all along. He's just been invisible. From there, the player can return to Jean and inform her that Jaskar has been located. Even though she's distracted by the loss of her manual, she still promises to write you the recommendation. Up next is the Bravil recommendation. Chatting with Kudai, she gives the player another menial yet personal task. She tells you that she's gotten pretty close with a lot of the guildmates here. One of them, Ardaline, has had her mage's staff stolen. The perpetrator is a Dunmer named Varen Vamori, and believe it or not, he did it in the name of love. He has feelings for her and wanted to get her attention, but clearly, things went too far. After increasing Vamori's disposition, you learn that he panicked and sold the staff to a friend in the Imperial City, Soris Aranim. From there, Kudai gives the player 3 more scrolls of Beguile and sends you off to the capital. Chatting with Soris, who has a home in the Talos Plaza district, you'll quickly learn that there are a couple of different approaches. Increasing his disposition past 70, the Dunmer agrees to give it back, but for a price of 200 gold. Alternatively, raising his wife's disposition, she tells you that the staff is in a chest in the basement, and the key is upstairs in his desk. One method saves a little bit of time and effort, while the other saves a little bit of cash. With the staff in hand, The player then returns to Bravil and gives it over to Kudai. Not only does she write the recommendation, but she teaches the player a new spell, Captivate. It's an illusion spell that charms the target by 10 points for 10 seconds on touch. Up next is the Cheydinhal recommendation. Without trying to spoil too much, this is one of the only recommendations that foreshadows important plot points of the story. While there's technically one more, this one is the most prevalent in the storyline. Entering the guild hall, the player speaks with its corresponding leader, Falcar. Falcar is a rude and condescending Altmer. He has an air of arrogance about him. He talks down to the player, questions your skills, and dismisses your goals within the faction. Although, the task he gives you seems quite simple. He was working on a Ring of Burden and entrusted it with another associate. He believes that said associate let his frustrations win and proceeded to chuck it down the local well. Falcar wants you to retrieve it for him. Vahtacen, a magician at the hall and 2 ranks lower than Falcar, has the key for said well. Running over to her and sparking up a conversation, the Argonian seems off. She skirts around the subject and tells you to come back when Falcar is not around. So, waiting until the early morning when the coast's clear, the conversation resumes. Vahtacen believes that Falcar has ulterior motives. This task was recently given to another associate, Vidkun, and he was never seen again. She thinks that the hall leader is trying to get the player killed. She tells you to proceed with extreme caution. Vahtacen gives you the key to the well as something extra, a buoyancy spell that gives the player feather and water breathing for 30 seconds. Running out back to the well and descending the ladder, you end up in a chamber filled with water. Without the spell, and depending on your class, time is of the essence. At one end of the well, you'll spot the corpse of Vidkun. He doesn't have much on his person, just some gold, clothes, and of course, the Ring of Burden. Taking a closer look though, the story starts to piece itself together. The ring has a weight of 150. It was likely placed down here by Falcar. Then, as either some sort of challenge or a sick game, he tasks new associates with retrieving it. Clearly, Vidkun was caught by surprise and couldn't escape. Exiting the well with the ring, the quest marker points you back to Vahtacen. Interacting with her, you learn that a lot has transpired in those few moments you were gone. She confronted Falcar about his disturbing task, as well as how he's been treating everyone else. The Altmer then flew into a fit of rage and stormed off. Vahtacen is unsure if Falcar ever got around to writing the recommendation. She asks you to take a look for it in his private quarters. Doing so, you unfortunately don't find anything of the sorts. However, you do stumble onto something greater. Hidden in his drawer is a pair of black soul gems. At the moment, you likely aren't familiar with what these vessels do and how they work. That's touched on later in the story. For now though, the player brings them back to Vahtacen, who shows the utmost concern for them. As she takes them from you, she promises to write a recommendation in Falcar's stead. Up next is the Leyawiin recommendation. Arriving at the guild hall, the player is directed to Degale, an elderly Bosmer. At first, she seems a little off. Her sentences are broken, she's frantic, and she talks about hearing voices. By the end of it though, she mentions something about an amulet and a stone. Being directed to Agata, Degale's second in command, she fills you in on what's happened. Degale has a history of visions. Usually, they've proven useful to the guild, but as of late, they've been chaotic and uncontrollable. The visions have been controlled by something called a seer stone, although the amulet has since gone missing, hence the chaos. The stone's existence has been kept a secret from most of the hall. If word got out about it, Degale's sanity and leadership would be a hot topic. However, Agata feels it's time to start asking around in order to see if anyone knows anything. Chatting with some of your guildmates at the hall, you'll eventually land on the Nord, Calthar. While most others don't know a thing about the Seer Stone, Calthar seems well informed. He's upfront about his lack of empathy and understanding towards Degale. He doesn't find it fair that the rest of the hall has to answer to someone who can't keep their sanity. The Nord thinks it's time for her to retire and to let someone else take the leadership role. Calthar then goes on to mention Degale's father and how he had the same blessing/curse. Returning to Agata, she finds it suspicious that the Nord knows so much about Manduin, Degale's dad. She suggests talking to Degale again, as maybe the Bosmer can share some light on how Manduin quelled his visions. Through more cryptic language and cries for help, it's revealed that her father is buried at Fort Blueblood. What's more, he had an identical seer stone and it's likely still in his coffin. Fort Blue Blood is located east-southeast of Leyawiin. The dungeon has 2 zones, and it's currently occupied by leveled marauders. Most marauders are placed at an equal level to the player, or anywhere from 1 to 4 levels below your character. In total, you might see anywhere from 13 to 20 marauders in and around the dungeon. Now, I wanted to quickly take this time to explain something about the guild halls. Each guild hall has its own specialization when it comes to a school of magic. As pointed out by the Imperial Charter of the Guild of Mages, Cheydinhal deals with alteration, Chorrol deals with conjuration, Skingrad is destruction, Bravil is illusion, Leyawiin is mysticism, and Anvil is restoration. Excluded from the list are Bruma and Kavach. This could be related to the necromancy ban, and technically, alchemy is missing from this list as well. However, every hall dabbles with potion crafting. In any case, what this means is that each guild hall will offer training and spells for their respective school of magic. What's more, almost all of the recommendations encourage the player to use a specific skill set. Bravil pushes the player to charm Varen, Saurus, and Erisare, a spell governed by illusion. Cheydinhal wants the player to cast Buoyancy, a spell that influences your aquatics and carrying capacity, something that's governed by alteration. While it isn't thrown in the player's face, the crawl through Fort Blue Blood would be much easier if spells like Detect Life, Reflect Damage, Dispel, and Reflect Spell were utilized. Now, without spoiling too much, a Destruction spell is gifted to the player for Skingrad's recommendation, and Restoration comes in handy for Anvils. Essentially, these all act as a soft nudge to the player. It gets you thinking about the various schools of magic and the best ways to use them. Lore-wise, it's fair to say that the NPCs at each guild hall are studying to master that specific arcane art. As for the university, again, all will be revealed soon, but it more so acts as a place for mages to work on their enchantments, spellcrafting, and to study Tamrielic lore and artifacts. Back to the matter at hand, once the Marauders have been defeated, including the Warlord, the final chamber of Fort Blue Blood can be accessed. Inside, you'll run into 2 monster enemies. At the back of the room is Manduin's coffin, and inside of that is Manduin's amulet, a second seer stone. Attempting to leave the chamber, you'll get cut off by Calthar. It's here that the Nord comes clean. He just wanted to show everyone at the hall that Degale is no longer fit to be leader. He swears he was going to return the amulet once she's been removed from power. In a fit of rage, Calthar then attacks the player. The Nord is placed 1 level above you, fights with an iron dagger, and utilizes common necromancer spells, i.e. summon undead, destruction magic, and restoration. It's revealed through rumors and his skill set that he's actually a reformed necromancer. Whether his scheme was related to the banished practice or just for his own selfish reasons is unknown. Once he's been defeated, the player is free to leave the fort and to return to the Leyawiin Hall. Handing the amulet back to Degale, she's extremely grateful and her visions are finally at ease. Not only does she promise to write the recommendation, but she offers a bit of foreshadowing for your journey. The visions have shown her that many will rise and fall at your hands. You have an important role to play in the guild, and there will be plenty of carnage on the path. Up next is the Skingrad recommendation. The leader of this hall is Adrienne Beren. Upon chatting with her, she appears to be absent-minded and very much into her work. In terms of a task, Adrienne asks you to find a fellow guildmate, Aerthor. He's been missing for quite some time, and it's not that she fears for his safety, but it's that she wants some notes back that he once borrowed. Asking around the guild for Aerthor, 2 members can give you some valuable insight. Vig the Cautious and Druja inform you that Aerthor has been practicing his magic at Bleakflat's cave. This was actually at the request of Adrienne, as the Bosmer caused some sort of scamp incident last year. Taking this newfound knowledge to Adrienne and reminding her that she's the one who sent him away, she urges you to go and retrieve him. Again though, it's not out of concern, but more so personal gain. On your way out, she teaches you a weak fireball spell, in case you run into any trouble. Bleakflat's cave is located north of the city. Upon going inside, you'll quickly discover that the place is crawling with deranged zombies, enemies that are unique to this quest. They're leveled to the player, and being 14 plus has you facing off against their best possible variation, headless deranged zombies. However, they have a 60% weakness to fire, and some simple destruction spells or enchantments can go a long way. Once all 7 of the undead are defeated, the player can locate Aerthor, who's seemingly safe and sound. Escorting him out of the cave and back to the guild hall, he approaches Adrienne. Her reaction to his situation and rescue is dry, but you can see that she does somewhat care for his well-being. After shooing him off again, the player can then speak with her. She promises to write the recommendation for you after she finishes up with her work. There are now only 2 recommendations to go. The next one is from the Anvil Guildhall. Arriving at the coastal city, the player can seek out its leader, Chorrol. Chorrol acts very professional and is quite stoic. Asking about the task at hand, she fills you in with what's been going on. A rogue mage has been robbing and murdering merchants along the Gold Road. The Council of Mages at the university has asked Chorrol to put an end to it. This is where you come in. All she tells you for now is that you're to seek out Ariel Gerard at the Brina Cross Inn for more information. Doing so, Gerard keeps everything hush-hush and tells you to rent a room for the night. From there, she'll follow you up and give you the details in private. Talking with the proprietor, Christophe Moraine, he makes mention of the murders and how business has been thin lately. You can either keep your cards close to your chest or lie and say you're a merchant. As you go to leave the common area, a stranger approaches you. Her name is Caminalda, and she overheard your conversation with Christophe. She tells you about how scared she is to travel alone and that it's a bad time to be a wandering merchant. The conversation abruptly ends, and from there, it's back to the task at hand. Heading up to your room, Ariel comes in shortly, and the 2 of you get to business. The plan goes as follows. After some rest at the inn, you're to take the road leading east to Kvatch. During this time, Ariel and another battle mage will be following closely. As soon as the rogue mage confronts you, it's go time. You're to defend yourself by whatever means necessary. The battle mages will also be there to back you up. After traveling along the road for a bit, Caminalda, the scared Altmer from the inn, steps in front of you. She reveals that she's been the one robbing and killing the merchants, and she says that you're next. Caminalda utilizes powerful frost magic spells and is placed 4 levels above the player. However, she has natural weaknesses to fire, frost, and shock, so those can be used to her advantage. Plus, the battle mages are quite the powerful ally. Once Caminalda has been defeated, the player can return to Chorrol at the hall. She acknowledges you and your success, then promises to write a recommendation to the university. The final task as an associate comes from the Chorrol Guildhall. Seeking out Tychius, the hall's leader, his recommendation is also quite personal. The Argonian asks the player to find out why someone named Irana has shown up in Chorrol. The ultimate goal is to shoo her away from the guild, as there's apparently bad blood there. If this sounds strange, that's because the 2 of them actually have a history. According to guild rumors and their own personal accounts, they were both removed from the Arcane University. The story goes that Irana abused her power and influence. Meanwhile, Tychius was the one to blow the whistle on her. Unfortunately, it sounds like Tychius got caught up in the thick of it and was also shunned from the university. It's revealed that Irana will lie, cheat, and steal to get her way. Chatting with the High Elf, she takes a liking to your character and asks for your help. She's looking for something called Fingers of the Mountain. It's a book that can be found at the nearby location of Cloudtop. However, she doesn't say much more than that. Bringing this information to Tychius, the plot thickens. He becomes animated and hammers home the point that she can't get her hands on that book. Both mages want the book retrieved and brought back to them. Both mages tell you that the book is written in the alien language and not just anyone can read it. Cloudtop is located northwest of Chorrol. Upon arrival, you'll come across quite the strange sight. The remains of a stone structure are surrounding an out-of-place pillar. In front of the pillar is a charred corpse that has Fingers of the Mountain in its inventory. The scene itself gets explained later, but for now you have multiple options with how to proceed. No matter what you do and who you make an enemy out of, there will be an option for redemption. For this scenario, I chose to bring the book to Tychius. After handing it over, all seems well and he even promises to write up the recommendation. Technically, from here, the player can skip over part 2 of the quest as it's purely optional. The pathway to the Arcane University is now free and open. However, to completely cover all the bases, after giving the book to Tychius, the player can then go and seek out Irana. She's less than pleased with your actions and goes as far as insulting your intelligence. After calming down, she storms up a new plan. The Altmer wants you to steal the book from Tychius and bring it over to her. She still promises to give out the same reward as before. Fingers of the Mountain is stored in Tychius' chest. This is located in the living quarters of the Guildhall. Going into the chest and taking the book isn't considered stealing, so you don't have to worry about getting caught. Returning to Erana and handing it over, she asks for 24 hours to analyze the texts. After a day goes by, she says she's committed most of the book to memory. After insulting your intelligence a little more, she hands you a note that contains the instructions for your reward. The note also sheds more light on Cloudtop, the pillar, and the charred remains. The Imperials discovered the pillar, likely in some alien ruin, and chose to move it to Cloudtop. A theory is that it's due to the harsh weathers and altitude that the area presents. As you'll soon see, the pillar reacts to the elements in a unique way. The goal here was to learn about alien magic and to attempt to harness its powers. However, as the experiments went on, the Imperials learned that they were in way over their heads, and what they had discovered was actually more dangerous than they realized. The pillar reacts to magic. It was fine-tuned by the guild to react solely to shock magic. That reaction has the ability to strike a person dead on the spot. However, if you approach the pillar with a Welkin stone in your inventory and then use some sort of shock magic on it, you'll be gifted a unique and rare spell. That spell is called Finger of the Mountain, and it's a leveled destruction spell. It causes ranged shock damage in 5 feet on the target. It can be incredibly powerful, dealing up to 200 points of damage, but it comes with a price, as it can also sap up 3,551 points of magicka. In any case, that concludes the Chorrol recommendation and the recommendation quests as a whole. Now that all 7 references have been written, it's time to begin the journey through the Arcane University and the Mages Guild's overarching storyline. Up until now, if you tried to gain access to the university, you'll have noticed that everything is locked up and quote-unquote private property. Everything except for the Archmage's lobby. That's still the case, but it's because the player needs to become acquainted with Raminus Polus. Raminus is a master wizard in the faction, and for the time being, he'll also be your overseer. Polus is a nice enough guy. His personality is pretty generic, and even though he's ranked highly within the guild, he too is just following orders. Upon your first interaction with him, he promotes you to the rank of apprentice and gives you the robe of the apprentice. For now, I'll forego talking about the questline's rewards, as I'd prefer to go over every single one at the end of the story. Resuming the conversation, Polus acknowledges that the guild has its share of bad apples. However, he also talks about how the faction can give its members plenty of new opportunities to learn and grow. In terms of your first task at the university, it's more so meant to benefit you and your character. Raminus sends you off to Wellspring Cave in order to craft your own mage's staff. It's considered to be a rite of passage for all mages at the university. The cave has 2 main caretakers, Zarasha and Aletta. Either one should be able to help you with your staff. Arriving at Wellspring Cave, something seems off. There's a dead body on the ground, and standing over it is a robed figure. Upon getting closer, the figure turns around and aggroes onto you. This NPC is a necromancer, and they're standing over the corpse of Zarasha, one of the grove's caretakers. The Wellspring necromancers are placed 2 levels below the player. They'll either be Bretons or High Elves, wield maces, and have access to a variety of spells. In total, there are 6 that need to be dealt with within the cave. Now, as to why they attacked the guild, that part is still technically unknown. However, I briefly touched on it before. There's some important lore to go over. When the current Archmage, Hannibal Traven, took leadership over the guild, he immediately banned the practice of necromancy. This involves using the dead, spirits, and supernatural forces for your own magical purposes. Traven believed that the guild should be able to hold itself to higher standards. Plus, it was typical for mages who delved into the dark arts to turn wicked and corrupt. Unsurprisingly, the ban wasn't loved by all, and as a result, a sizable population of mages left the guild. While most necromancers act alone, it seems like a lot of those wizards and witches ended up joining some kind of necromancer cult and are taking out their frustrations on the faction. Once the cave has been cleared, the player can then follow the tunnels and exit out into the waterfront. Here, you'll run into 3 more necromancers. One of them, Noveni Othrin, will even approach you and hurl some threats. Othrin is standing over the corpse of Aletta, the guild's 2nd caretaker. It's quite clear that this was no random attack. It was planned, methodical, and they took the guild by surprise. From here, the journal updates and tells the player to return to Raminus Polus. However, before doing so, there's actually a stone chest nearby that contains an unfinished staff. Your character is still going to need it for what's to come. Traveling back to the university and chatting with Polis, he's truly shocked to hear the news. The necromancers have never been this bold before, and he's unsure what prompted the attack. Raminis has to go relay the information to the Council of Mages, but for now, he wants you to continue with your staff. Over in the Chironasium, you'll find a wizard by the name of Delmar, and he'll be able to help you out. The back half of the university contains some pretty interesting buildings. There's the Praxographical Center, which is where mages can create new spells. There's the Mystic Archives, which acts as the library. The Mage Quarters is where everyone sleeps. The practice rooms are where mages can fine-tune their spells. The Chironasium is where you can enchant your gear, and the Lustratorium is where you can find alchemical tools and ingredients. Speaking with Delmar at the Chironasium, creating your staff is quite the customizable experience. The player can pick between the schools of destruction, illusion, and mysticism. From there, you can branch out into fire, frost, or shock attacks, charm, paralyze, or silent spells, and then soul trap, telekinesis, or dispel powers. Most of these enchantments will come in handy for the rest of the questline. Once you've picked your preferred ability, Delmar tells you to give him 24 hours. The power and charge of your staff is level dependent, and it becomes the best possible variation at level 15. After the day's up, your staff will be in the cupboard at the back of the room. From here, it's now time to return to Raminis and resume your conversation. Upon request, Polis advances you to the rank of Journeyman. In terms of tasks, he says that the council is running an investigation at Wellspring Cave. In the meantime, he'd like you to go and retrieve a book from the Count of Skingrad, Janus Hasseldor. The book is apparently relevant to the current situation. Plus, the guild's spread thin as it is, and the task needs to get done. Before leaving, Raminis warns you that Skingrad can be quite the unusual place. He says that you should proceed with caution. Arriving at the castle and going on inside, the marker points you to an NPC named Mercator Hosidus. He's an imperial nobleman who takes care of the count's appointments. Mercator is quite the unlikable fellow. Similar to other NPCs you would have encountered, he comes across as rude and arrogant. At first, he denies your request to see the count. However, he says to check back tomorrow, as Janus might have changed his mind by then. Doing so, wouldn't you know it, Mercator says that the count's agreed to meet with you. It just has to be a place of his choosing. Hosidus says to come to the fields north of the Cursed Mine, right by the vineyards, just after 2 a.m. The Count will be waiting for you there. Following this request and waiting until the early hours of the morning, Hasseldor is nowhere to be found. Instead, Mercator, along with 2 other necromancers, step out from the shadows. They approach the player and Mercator gives his villain monologue. The Count was never informed of the meeting, the necromancers have big plans on the horizon, and they need to eliminate you. As the battle kicks off, a stranger comes running in from nowhere. The man is dressed in nobleman's garb and fights using his fists. Together, the 2 of you battle your assailants. After Mercator, Tyrion, and Monjor Hennem are defeated, the stranger then approaches you. As it turns out, this man is Janus Hasseldor, the Count of Skingrad. There's a good chance that this is your introduction to the Count, and you'll notice that his appearance is quite unsettling. Janus Hasseldor is actually a vampire. While this is a pretty big point of interest, it doesn't get touched on until later in the story. Hasseldor begins by scolding the player. He says that he'd never meet anyone like this, as it's incredibly dangerous and naive. However, thanks to your actions, he was able to root out the necromancers in his court, i.e. Mercator and his 2 companions. Through a little more dialogue, Hasseldor tells you to relay a message to the guild, that he hasn't teamed up with the necromancers. Confused, you let him know that you simply came here for a book. Janus scoffs at the idea and informs you that you've been lied to. There's no book. You've been sent here to keep tabs on the Count and to see where his allegiances lie. Rumors have been growing of the Necromancer's cult and their rise to power. Rest assured though, Hasseldor hasn't settled in with them, and the guild has nothing to fear from him. Returning to Polis, he apologizes for putting you in harm's way. He kept the quest's true nature a secret due to the Count's vampirism. The Count is a powerful man with a lot of connections. The Mages Guild is one of the only groups out there who knows his true identity. The Count and the faction have been cordial and even supportive of one another. But lately, due to the rising necromancer threat, that relationship has been under a great deal of stress. You, a low-ranking journeyman, were sent in so as to not raise any suspicion. From here on out, Polis promises to be straightforward and honest with you. Upon request, Raminis promotes you to the rank of Evoker. As a reward for your efforts, He also gives you the Spell Drinker amulet. Inquiring about more work, Polis directs you to Chorrol. Chorrol is a member of the Elder Council and specializes in Ayleid history. He's currently the head of an excavation job out in an Ayleid site. Speaking with Chorrol, he wants you to go and help out with his project. The ruin is called Vahtacen, and it's located south of Cheydinhal. The group there has apparently run into some sort of problem. Unfortunately, Chorrol's got too much on his plate at the university, and at the recommendation of Remastered, he wants you to be his eyes and ears. Arriving at the site, you begin to traverse through the mines. It would appear as though a group was digging here, broke through into an Ayleid ruin, and from there, the university's research team took over. There are only 2 friendly NPCs present in Vahtacen. The first is Skingrad, Chorrol's main contact. Skingrad is quite unhappy with her current position. She feels as though her talents are being wasted, and what's more, she doesn't like the neglect from Chorrol. She explains that her and a fellow guildmate, Cheydinhal, have come across a magical pillar. Similar to the pillar at Cloudtop, it reacts to magic. However, most spells end up triggering some sort of defense mechanism, which then badly hurts the caster. Speaking with Cheydinhal, he's a little more lighthearted and open-minded about the project. There is more going on here than meets the eye. In the room with the pillar, there are carvings in each corner. Those carvings could be the key to deciphering the puzzle. Cheydinhal then goes on to say that Skingrad has a reference book of ancient Ayleid texts. Those texts could probably prove useful. Retrieving the booklet from her and handing it to Cheydinhal, the player can then go around and interact with each carving. After you've read them all, you can then get a translation from Cheydinhal as to what they mean. In short, the carvings speak of fire, frost, damaging magicka, and fortifying magicka. Putting 2 and 2 together, the player can try their hand and cast those spells at the pillar in that exact order. If you don't have those spells, there's a chest behind Cheydinhal that has an abundance of scrolls, let alone the 4 you need. With each cast, the pillar will move around until finally, a pathway further into the dungeon is revealed. The second zone, Vahtacen Lorsal, has the player facing off against 9 undead enemies. Out of the 9, at least 5 of them are ethereal, and 1 of them is boss level. Along the way, you'll also have to avoid various pitfall, swinging blade, and spike traps. Finally, at the end of your crawl, you'll enter a grand room that contains an elevated platform at its center. By pressing a button at the opposite end, 2 staircases are formed and the top of the platform can be reached. Interacting with 1 more button, an Ayleid case is removed, and just behind it is an ancient elven helm. Other than the fact that it's from the Wild Elves, the helm itself isn't very special and looks similar to a regular elven helm. Regardless, it's exactly what Skingrad, Cheydinhal, and Chorrol have been looking for. Finding your way back out of Lorsal and into the first zone of Vahtacen, Skingrad can then be reported to. Excited that they've finally made some sort of discovery, she tells you to bring it to Chorrol immediately. Doing so, the interaction is brief, and all that really comes of it is Chorrol congratulating you on the discovery and giving you a pat on the back. Remastered put it best: this quest serves as a break from the Necromancer cult. In reality, this type of mission is largely what the player would be doing if there wasn't such a big threat from the Necromancers. Returning to Polis, he gets right into your next task. The Council of Mages is still running their investigation. In order to make progress, they need as much information as possible. The Mystic Archives is being tapped out of its resources. Tarmina, the library's keeper, is being spread thin. However, Remastered believes that they're trying to obtain the wrong kind of information. He draws attention back to Falcar, the old leader of the Cheydinhal Hall. He calls out the parallels between Black Soul Gems and the Necromancer cult. At the moment though, the guild isn't even sure what Black Soul Gems do or how they're created. Polis believes that the answers to those questions might yield some very valuable information. So, while everyone else is researching the Necromancer cult, he wants you to research Black Soul Gems. Paying a visit to Tarmina, it's evident that she's a busy woman. She comes off as snappy and snarky. She quickly apologizes though, and explains that she's under a great deal of stress. From there, you're able to ask her about the unique soul gems. Tarmina says that there's a book somewhere in the Mystic Archives that sheds light on them. It's called Necromancer's Moon, and what's more, the last person to take it out was Falcar. The text can be located on a side table along the western wall of the archives. It talks about strange things like the Order of the Worm, the Day of Reckoning, the Revenant, the Necromancer's Moon, and some important figure who is only referred to as him. It talks about how these followers should wait in the crevices of Nirn and look to the heavens for signs of his return. When the moment's right, it'll be time to rise up and strike as one. Taking the book back to Raminis, he thinks it's best to ask someone named Bravil about the Shade of the Revenant, a celestial phenomenon. Bravil is the caretaker of the orrery, and normally she spends a lot of her time in the Archmage's lobby. Chatting with her, she mentions how Falcar asked her these same questions not long ago. Unfortunately, with the orrery currently powered down and dismantled, it's impossible for her to get a point of reference. However, after leaving in a hurry, Falcar ended up dropping one of his notes. Bravil thinks that it might come in handy for the investigation. Delivering the writings to Raminis, he thinks it's a good idea for the player to go to one of the reference locations, the Dark Fissure. There, you're to keep an eye out for any necromancers and the aforementioned Shade of the Revenant. The note calls attention to 4 primary sites: the Dark Fissure, Fort Asterius, Fort Lynchall, and Wendelbeck. It mentions how the altars have been raised, anchorites have been called, and once a week, His Grace shines down on us. There are a couple of ways to progress with this quest. For starters, you can go to any of the 4 primary sites. It doesn't have to be the Dark Fissure. Upon arriving at the site, just outside of the dungeon's entrance, you'll see a rather strange looking altar. Starting from the first of each month, and every 8 days after that, the Shade of the Revenant, a purple beam of light, shines down. What's more, you may even see a necromancer standing around it. If not, that necromancer is likely somewhere inside the dungeon. This is the Worm Anchorite. They'll talk about how the Order of the Black Worm is back and that nothing can stop them now. After defeating the Anchorite and looking in their inventory, you'll find a handwritten note. It talks about how to create these black soul gems. All you have to do is place a grand soul gem in the altar and then strike it with some sort of soul trap spell. From there, it'll be converted to a black soul gem. On the other hand, if you simply placed a grand soul gem in the altar and waited for the Shade of the Revenant, the gem will be converted automatically. This essentially gives non-spellcasters a chance at creating them as well. Returning to Raminis, he thanks the player for their efforts and discovery. He says that he needs to pass this information along to the council. In the meantime, you can ask about an advancement in rank. Polis will promote you to the title of Magician. Inquiring about further tasks, this is when the next phase of the questline takes over. Archmage Traven has specifically requested to see the player. Now, all jobs and assignments come directly from Hannibal. Traven is a decent enough guy. Similar to Polis, he doesn't have a very strong personality. He's well-spirited, but at times can come across as naive. Speaking with the Archmage, you make his acquaintance. He mentions that there will be some difficult tasks ahead for the player, but you seem like you're capable enough. For the first assignment, Hannibal begins by discussing the ongoing necromancy threat. The Council of Mages has watched on silently as the cult grew. Most of their information on the cult has actually come from an informant, someone who's been able to infiltrate their ranks and pass as one of them. However, the Archmage believes that this informant is now in grave danger. Mucianus Elias, the man in question, hasn't reported back in quite some time. His last known location is the alien ruin of Nenyan Twill. A group of battle mages has been sent there in an attempt to capture him. If things go sour though, there's a good chance that Elias will be killed in the crossfire. Your job is to enter the ruins and ensure Mucianus' safe return. Nenyan Twill is located south of the Imperial City, just west of the Inn of Ill Omen. By now, I've mentioned this Council of Mages more than a handful of times. As we know it right now, the council is comprised of 4 members: Traven, Erlov Chorrol, Raminis Polis, and an Altmer named Karanya. There could be 5+ members. There's speculation that Bothiel, Tarmina, and even High Chancellor Akato could fill in those gaps. Regardless, the council is in charge with governing the guild's actions, creating, changing, and removing policies, plus the control of spell sales. We'll get to see more of the council later, but for now, they're the ones who are quietly working behind the scenes, combating the necromancer threat. Arriving at Nenyan Twill and going inside, you'll be greeted by the last remaining battle mage. His name is Fithrigair, and he fills you in on what's happened. The necromancers knew the guild was coming. All of the other battle mages were slaughtered. As of right now, the cult has fled further into the ruins, so the 2 of you will have to do some crawling to get to the bulk of them. Charging on ahead, the Bosmer triggers a spike trap, which 9 times out of 10 will end his life. Even if it doesn't, his first couple of encounters with the dungeon's enemies will do the trick. Fithrigair's role serves as a comedic element, but also as a symbol, a sign of the shifting tides. the Necromancer cult rising, and the Mages Guild falling. Nenyon Twill has 2 zones to it. The first contains 6 enemies, 4 Necromancers and 2 undead. It mostly comprises of small rooms, all joined together by winding walkways. The second zone, Nenyon Twill Riel Cell, has the player coming across the unique NPC, Mariette Riel. She informs you that the quote-unquote guest of honor has just left. As for Musianus, they turned him into a worm thrall. This was an act of punishment for crossing the cult. Before the conversation ends, she calls out someone who she refers to as the Master. I think it's fair to say that the him mentioned in Necromancer's Moon, the guest of honor, and the Master are all the same person, this possible leader of the Necromancer cult. After defeating Riel, the player needs to take on 3 more Necromancers, one of them is boss leveled, and 3 undead enemies. Once Riel's cell has been cleared, Musianus can be reached by interacting with a button at the back of the chamber. A false wall lowers, and behind it, you'll come across the zombified remains of Elias. He's non-hostile, but depending on how you feel, you can completely put him to rest. With the informant's fate known, the player can now exit Nenyon Twill and return to Traven, although the Archmage doesn't offer much besides his shock and grief. Before continuing on, Traven suggests you talk to Raminus for a promotion. Doing so, Polis advances you to the rank of Warlock. With it, you're now freely allowed to enter the Council of Mages, as before, it was technically considered trespassing. Returning to Hannibal and asking for another task, he tells the player that the Count of Skingrad wishes to speak with the guild. However, Hassildor only trusts the player, as he's worked with you before. Janus says he has vital information, and in order to keep his alliance, Traven wants you to head there immediately. Fast traveling to Skingrad and arriving at the castle, the player can speak with Howlers and set up a meeting. After a couple of minutes, the Count will approach you and discuss those aforementioned important matters. He starts off by saying that the news he bears isn't necessarily good. However, in order for him to share it, he first wants something out of the player. It's a favor. Some vampires have sprung up a nest in the nearby dungeon of Bloodcrust Cavern. Not only are they a threat to the town, but the attention they've brought is also a threat. A group of vampire hunters have come to Skingrad. If the hunters catch wind of the Count's true nature, his whole operation could be on the line. Essentially, the agreement goes, get rid of the vampires as well as the hunters, and he'll tell you what he knows. Through this dialogue as well, you get to learn a little more about Hassildor. He despises other vampires because they live like animals. In saying that, and given his current status, it's fair to say that Hassildor falls in with the Cyrodiilic vampire clan. These groups of vampires are able to blend in with society and are often upper class or even nobles. While they do feed on the living, they target folks who are asleep and unaware, often leaving them alive. Through some sort of vampiric network, it's apparently common for other vampires to approach Skingrad. They see all that Hassildor has achieved and through jealousy and envy, wish to tear it down. Like some of the previous quests, there are a couple of different ways to approach this one. For starters, Eridor, the leader of the vampire hunters, can usually be found outside of the chapel. Speaking with him, the player can tip him off that the vampires are held up in Bloodcrust Cavern. Typically, after some time, the 3 hunters will group up and begin to make their way there. From that point onward, it's a bit of a toss-up as to who the winner will be, the undead or the living. If you'd like, you can charge in there and help out one of the sides, whether that's the vampires or the hunters. Otherwise, the player can take matters into their own hands and storm Bloodcrust Cavern. In total, there are 10 quest-related enemies in here. The dungeon is built like one long circuit, so picking one of the paths, you can essentially run a gauntlet and take out anyone who's in your way. According to the UESP, the Bloodcrust vampires are on par with vampire matriarchs and patriarchs. That places them 2 levels higher than the player. However, they still have a 50% weakness to fire, so spells and enchantments should have a major impact on the fight. Depending on your methods, once the vampires have been dealt with, the player will then have to get rid of the hunters. Violence is always an option, but if it's done in Skingrad, the guards will get called. On the other hand, the pacifist run is also an option. By delivering a sample of vampire dust to Eridor, he'll see that the job's been taken care of and move on from the city. All methods work, all that matters is that the hunters and vampires are no longer in and around Skingrad. Returning to the castle and setting up another meeting with the Count, he finally reveals this vital piece of information. It may not mean much to the player at the moment, but if you're steeped in Elder Scrolls lore, you'll recognize the name right off the bat. Hasildor tells you that Mannimarco has returned. What's more, he's the one who's leading the Necromancers and the so-called Order of the Black Worm. Mannimarco is so well protected, hidden, and powerful that he might as well be invincible. The Count only knows that he's hiding out somewhere in the northern part of Cyrodiil. Relaying the information back to Traven, again, he's surprised and dumbfounded at the news. He had no clue it had gotten this bad, and that the cult had this much power behind them. From here, the Archmage needs 24 hours to consult the Council. After the day's up, the player can return to Traven for their next task. Hannibal mentions that Mannimarco's return is much worse than they could have possibly imagined. They're unsure why he's targeting the guild, but he apparently has enough power to destroy the faction. While the Council continues to look into his motives, Traven wants the player to look into another matter. The Archmage hasn't heard from Jean Frisoric, the leader of the Bruma Hall, in quite some time. The silence is unusual for her, so Traven would like you to go and check up on things. Traveling to Bruma and entering the guild hall, the scene is quite shocking. The hall is ablaze. Everything is in ruins. The furniture, goods, and items are all thrown over and destroyed. Corpses of your fallen guildmates are littered on the ground, and hovering over them are leveled undead. The goal is to clear a path to Jean's office and see if there are any survivors. Now, for those who don't know who Mannimarco is, the game doesn't really do a great job at explaining his lore. Essentially, Mannimarco has a rich history with the Elder Scrolls universe. He appeared in Daggerfall as well as ESO, although the latter came out after Oblivion. The Agent of the Blades, aka the player's character in Daggerfall, ends up working with Mannimarco on a number of quests. Although this alliance doesn't make him good by any means. His actions and requests are questionable. What the King of Worms seeks is power and knowledge. He'll do almost anything to obtain them. His ultimate goal is godhood, and several texts within the universe seem to suggest that he's achieved it, or something akin to it. By the end of Daggerfall, he's successful in creating the Necromancer's Moon, or rather, the Shade of the Revenant, the celestial phenomenon we see in Oblivion. This is all to say that if the guild made an enemy out of someone who's practically achieved godhood and has that much influence, the guild is in deep trouble. After fighting your way through the hall and reaching Jean's office, you'll come across a lone necromancer. Her name is Camilla Lalia. The interaction is brief, and she says that you've yet again missed the guest of honor. After a small showdown, which leads to her defeat, Jaskar appears out of nowhere. Using illusion magic, he was able to hide himself from the attackers. However, he was forced to watch all of his fellow guildmates die. Jaskar says that he saw the King of Worms. While Mannimarco was killing Volinaro, it appeared as though he was able to suck out his soul. From there, the King of Worms uttered something about Echo Cave and destroying the guild. From here, the player rushes back to the university to inform Traven. Now, because it wasn't touched on before, Mannimarco is able to capture human, mer, and beastfolk souls because of those black soul gems. The black soul gems have been altered, twisted, and corrupted. Now they serve as vessels for slain souls of the higher life forms. Instead of allowing the fallen to move on to their afterlife, their essence is used to power and enhance others. Speaking with Hannibal, again, he's really only able to express his shock and disbelief. You might have noticed that this is a common occurrence with him. To me, I've always understood it as the guild being a couple of steps behind the necromancers. It shows that they have them beat at every corner. While it could also be to demonstrate a certain level of naivety, I believe it's also thrown in to show a shift in power. The faction is becoming more and more helpless as the King of Worms continues to advance with his plans. Even someone as powerful and influential as the Archmage is unable to make a difference here. Again, Traven asks you to come back after 24 hours as he needs to discuss some things with the council. Once the day's up, Hannibal suggests talking to Polis for another advancement. Raminus promotes you to the rank of wizard and teaches you a leveled spell called Wizard's Fury. Once more, I'll go over all the rewards towards the end of the video. Returning to Traven, he explains to the player how the council is currently in chaos. The members couldn't agree on a course of action, and as such, broke out into a panic. Kuranya stormed off with the Necromancer's amulet. This was in an attempt to keep it away from the general public. However, Traven believes she has ulterior motives. He thinks that she wants to use it against Mannimarco, a dangerous feat in its own right. At the same time, Erlov Chorrol ran off with the Bloodworm Helm. He and a group of mages fled to a secluded area in order to study its power. The hope is that they can learn more about the enemy and the ways that they can defeat them. Currently, Traven's worried about the Order of the Black Worm's reach. Both parties are no longer protected by the safety of the university. He'd like the player to go and retrieve both artifacts, as well as convince both parties to return back here. This way, they'll have safety in numbers and the protection of the capital. This brings on two quests, the Bloodworm Helm and the Necromancer's Amulet. The missions can be done sequentially. You could do one, then the other, and then return back to Traven. Starting with the Bloodworm Helm, Chorrol and co are hiding out in Fort Telemann. Fort Telemann is located northeast of Leyawiin and just east of the Drunken Dragon Inn. Arriving, things already look grim, as there are necromancers and undead stationed outside. Entering the fort, there are two zones that the player needs to go through. The first zone contains anywhere from 5 to 6 necromancers, and one of them will be boss leveled. Again, this serves as a sign of Erlov's fate. Zone 2, Fort Telemann, Order of the Black Rose, is quite the interesting space. Here, there are 3 necromancers battling anywhere from 7 to 8 Daedra. This encounter is never explained, but it's heavily implied that the Daedra were summoned by Chorrol and co to defend the Bloodworm Helm. Either as a last-ditch effort, or by accident, this flock of Daedra was left behind to block anyone from going forward. This means that the player also has to fight their way through the Daedric ranks in order to reach Chorrol. Upon arriving in the final chamber, you'll come across a leveled Daedra, as well as Erlov's corpse. It would appear as though there weren't any survivors for the Mages Guild. Luckily, Erlov still has the helm on his person, and retrieving it puts an end to this quest. Now, as for the Necromancer's Amulet, Karanya and her group have fled to the ruins of Fort Ontis. Fort Ontis is located southwest of Chorrol, pretty much on the border of Hammerfell. Upon arrival, things are looking a little better than they did at Fort Telemann, sort of. Instead of necromancers guarding the ruins, it's a lone marauder. After defeating them and heading on inside, you might find yourself relieved at the sight of mages. Karanya's group is still safe and sound, so maybe there's a way you can convince them to bring the amulet back to the university. Running along the path of Fort Ontis, you'll eventually be led into the next zone, the Understreets. Here, you'll pass by a couple more mages before running into the High Elf. Now, you can finally try and talk some sense into her. Well, as it would just so happen, she has her wits about her. She knows exactly what she's doing, and Traven had a right to be suspicious. Karanya stole the amulet and intends to hand it over to Mannimarco. As soon as she realizes you're not here to join the cause, she turns aggressive and a fight breaks out. Karanya is placed at level 30 and knows leveled necromancer spells. She can be a tricky fight for lower leveled opponents, but again, her natural weaknesses to the elements can prove beneficial to the player. As soon as she's been defeated, you can loot the Necromancer's Amulet and make your escape. The only thing though is that now, every single mage in the fort has revealed their true colors. They're all part of the Necromancer cult and will attack on sight. You can choose to either leave the way you came in, or follow the secret tunnels back out into the first zone. Regardless, there are enemies waiting for you everywhere. Now, if you have the foresight, something that goes a long way in the beginning is attacking the mages as you encounter them. Due to their set faction, there's no penalty for eliminating them right from the get-go. You can take each one by surprise, and it doesn't cause any of the surrounding mages to aggro onto you. This method can save a lot of time and effort. Once you've escaped the fort, it's now time to return to Traven. Handing both of the artifacts over to Traven, he's saddened to hear of Erlov's death, and he's shocked to hear about Karanya's betrayal. At this point, the only 2 members of the council left that we know of are him and Raminus. Before continuing onwards, the player once again can go and receive a promotion from Polis. At this point, he advances you to the rank of Master Wizard, the second highest rank in the faction, second to the Archmage. You're an equal to Raminus, Erlov, Karanya, and Tarmina. Speaking with Traven, he calls this next task essential. He's received word that the Necromancers have crafted a unique soul gem. It's incredibly powerful, and the guild needs to get their hands on it before it can be given to the King of Worms. This soul gem is currently being held in the ruins of Cylorn. Hannibal has already sent a contingent of battle mages to secure the area, so the player should be able to meet up with them there. Cylorn is located directly southeast of Skingrad. Arriving at the Iliad Ruin, you'll spot 3 guildmates gathered at the outskirts. These are Meret, Thalfin, and Ivor. Speaking with Thalfin, she catches you up to speed. The Necromancers have placed some sort of enchantment on the entrance. There's no way for the guild to get in there, so they just have to wait for the cult to come outside. The mages have been timing their movements, so they should be wandering out anytime soon. Traven has placed the player in charge of the attack, so Thalfin suggests placing each battle mage in accordance with their strengths. Thalfin prefers an axe, so you can send her up close to the doors. Ivor prefers to heal, so you can send him with the vanguard. Then finally, Meret prefers to keep her distance, so you can tell her to stay in the back. Once everyone's in place, it doesn't take long for the group of necromancers to exit Cylorn. Now, there is something you can do here that will save you a plethora of time. Leading the group of cultists is Falcar, the former Cheydinhal hall leader. As soon as he catches wind of the battle mages, he books it back to the dungeons. This then puts you on a wild goose chase, and you need to go through a somewhat lengthy crawl in order to reach him. However, if you sneak around the exterior in a timely fashion, you can make it to the entrance before the mages spring their attack. As soon as they pounce, Falcar will come running over in your direction. This is your moment to fire off everything you have at him. Paralysis spells, destruction magic, poisons, you name it. If you successfully catch him here, you can kill him on the spot and save a decent amount of time and effort. On his person, he has the Colossal Black Soul Gem that you've been sent for, something that's unique to the Mages Guild questline and has great importance to the final quest. Once the Necromancer threat has been taken care of, the player can travel back to the university and report to Traven. He takes the gem, thanks you for your efforts, and says that there's no time to waste. His next task is by far the most important one that he could give you. The Archmage explains that the Colossal Black Soul Gem was meant for his soul. While it seems ludicrous for Traven to give in to Mannimarco's wishes, that's exactly what he's going to do. With the Colossal Soul Gem filled and on the player's person, you'll be invincible to any of Mannimarco's enthralling spells. This means that it'll be a fair showdown between the King of Worms and the player. The fate of the guild is in your hands. Before saying his farewells, Hannibal tells you that he's picked the player as the next Archmage of the guild. When all is said and done, you will be the one to lead them into a new age. As Traven says his goodbyes, he casts a fire spell on himself, ends his life, and fills the Colossal Black Soul Gem. Taking it, it's now up to the player to close out the saga. As mentioned by Jaskar, the King of Worms is hiding out in Echo Cave, a dungeon that's due west of Bruma. This is the final quest, so it's best to bring your A-game. Fully charged weapons, enchanted gear, plenty of consumables, and a follower if you have access to one. Upon arrival, you'll be confronted by someone named Bolor Savel. He talks about how he's the gatekeeper and that you'll need to get through him if you want an audience with Mannimarco. Savel is placed 3 levels above the player, fights with a silver dagger, and utilizes a set of necromancer spells. Once he's been taken care of, you can loot the key and begin your descent into Echo Cave. Echo Cave has 3 zones. The first 2 are quite extensive, while the third is simple and to the point. Zone 1 contains 7 necromancers and anywhere from 4 to 5 undead. It has you crawling through tight corridors as well as big open chasms. Ultimately though, it isn't unlike the previous dungeons that you would have already crawled through. Zone 2, Echo Passages, is built similarly to Zone 1. It has its fair share of small chambers while also making the player traverse through large canyons. This one contains 4 necromancers and 5 undead. Along the way, there are plenty of lootable containers for the player to get into. Then finally, the player ends up reaching Zone 3, Echo Necromancer's Chamber. Here, you battle your way through 1 boss level necromancer. They're guarding the doors leading into the big chamber. There are technically a couple of undead enemies in this zone, but depending on your route, they're optional fights. Heading into the large room, you'll spot the King of Worms, Mannimarco, on a platform at the back. Making your way over to him and getting in close, spikes rise around the arena, and he casts some sort of illusion spell, likely meant to keep you in one spot. From here, Mannimarco begins speaking with the player. He calls out Bolor for being unable to stop you and mentions that he'll reanimate his corpse when this is all over. Since you're stuck and can't go anywhere, or so he thinks, he figures now's a good time to chat. He admits to being disappointed with Traven's absence. Across the years, Mannimarco's gotten to know many of the archmages that came before him. While he'd prefer an archmage's soul, the players, Traven's star pupil, will have to do. Refusing to work for him, Mannimarco informs the player that he's going to enthrall you and study your soul. What he seeks is power. He calls out the guild for being exactly like him. The Mages Guild seeks power as well, but they label their intentions and methods as good, while calling out Mannimarcos as bad. At the end of the conversation, the King of Worms declares your soul as his, and the final fight breaks out. Mannimarco is placed 7 levels above the player. He fights using a silver dagger, as well as leveled necromancer spells. On top of that, depending on the player's level, he may have access to powerful destruction and conjuration magic. What's more, according to the UESP, Mannimarco has a unique birth sign, a 100-point fortification to his health, plus 20 to intelligence, as well as 50% resistance to magic, normal weapons, and paralysis. Depending on the player's build and loadout, this can prove to be a challenging fight. However, high-leveled weapons with elemental enchantments should be able to do a number on him. What's more, closing out the distance and keeping him restricted to his silver dagger can also work wonders for your longevity. Once the battle's over and the King of Worms has been defeated, the enclosure around the platform retracts and the player is free to leave. The Necromancer chamber has some decent loot in it, and Mannimarco himself has the Staff of Worms. It has the ability to reanimate targets for 30 seconds. This staff is one of 2 ways that the player can acquire this kind of power. Upon returning to the university, Raminus Pulis will be the first one to greet you. He's ecstatic to hear about Mannimarco's defeat, yet saddened to hear about Traven's sacrifice. Regardless, the guild as a whole has been uplifted. They know that they're now safe from the King of Worms' destruction. Hannibal left behind a note for Pulis detailing the player's ascension to Archmage. The university, as well as all of the guild halls, recognizes you as the faction's rightful leader. With that, thus ends the Mages Guild questline. There is technically one more quest to cover, but it's more so a reward than it is a mission. It's called Alchemy Acquisitions. Through conversations with Julian Fannis in the Lustratorium, you learn that the chest in the Archmage's quarters has a unique enchantment. The player can place certain ingredients in the container. After 24 hours, 10 more samples of said ingredient will appear in the chest. It's a budding alchemist's best friend. There are some important things to note though. Number 1, only certain ingredients are compatible with the chest. The UESP has a whole list of them written out. Number 2, only one ingredient can be added at a time. Otherwise, the chest will destroy all of the items instead of duplicating them. Then finally, number 3, the ingredients in the chest will be destroyed if they're left in there for a full week. If you abide by those rules, the enchanted chest will work wonders for you. Before ending things off, I said I'd go over the rewards given out to the player for each advancement in rank. There are only 4 rewards though, so this will be a brief segment. Number 1 is the Robe of the Apprentice, which was received after achieving Apprentice rank. It's a leveled robe, and in its best possible variation, it fortifies willpower by 6 points. Number 2 is the Spelldrinker Amulet, which was received after becoming an Evoker. This item is also leveled and has quite a few variations, 7 to be exact. In its best possible form though, it has spell absorption for 26 points. Number 3 is the Robe of the Conjurer. This is given to the player when they become a Conjurer. It's also leveled, has 6 different variations, and in its best possible form, fortifies intelligence and willpower for 7 points, and fortifies conjuration and destruction for 10 points. Then finally, number 4, there's the spell Wizard's Fury. This is taught to the player after becoming a wizard. The variation of the spell you get depends on your overall level as well as your destruction skill. The best possible spell, level 30 with expert knowledge of destruction, deals 10 points of fire damage for 15 seconds on target, as well as 30 points of both frost and shock damage. With the Mages Guild questline at an end, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the story down below. While I've heard mostly positive feedback about it, the biggest point of contention is including Mannimarco in its plot. The King of Worms is supposed to be incredibly powerful, and many believe that his character wasn't done proper justice in this installment. What did you think about Mannimarco, Traven, the quests, and the story as a whole? Again, I'd love to know down below, and until next time, keep on adventuring.